I found the secret my family had hidden for 20 years inside a place I had never thought to look. And by the time I understood what it meant, my mother was crying in the driveway. My brother had stopped speaking to me, and the house I had grown up in was being emptied box by box, because the truth had destroyed something none of us knew how to rebuild. The strange thing is, the secret didn't begin with a confession, a hidden letter, or some dramatic discovery in an attic. It began with a key. A small brass key that fell out of my father's coat 3 days after his funeral. I was going through his clothes because my mother couldn't bring herself to touch them, and when the key landed on the bedroom floor, I almost threw it into the junk drawer. Then I noticed a tiny number stamped into the metal, 214. My father had never rented a storage unit as far as I knew, but when I asked my mother about it, she went completely still. "Where did you get that?" she asked. "Dad's coat." She reached for it, but I closed my hand around the key. "What does 214 open?" She stared at me for several seconds before saying something I had never heard my mother say in my entire life. "Some things are better left buried." I thought she was talking about grief. I was wrong. The next morning, I searched my father's desk and found an old receipt from a storage facility on the edge of town. Unit 214. The account had been paid automatically for 20 years. 20 years. The name on the account wasn't my father's, it was my mother's. I called my older brother Daniel and told him what I'd found. His first reaction was anger. "Don't go there." I asked why. He said he didn't know. I asked how he could possibly know enough to tell me not to go. There was a long silence. Then he said, "Because Dad made us promise." That was when I realized Daniel knew something. Maybe not everything, but something. And suddenly the question wasn't just what was inside that storage unit. It was how many people in my family had spent 20 years lying to me. My name is Claire, and until that week, I believed I knew my family better than anyone. My father, Robert, had been a quiet man who repaired old furniture for a living and spent his evenings reading in the same chair beside the living room window. My mother, Elaine, was practical, organized, and almost painfully protective of the family. Daniel was 6 years older than me, confident, impatient, and always the first person to tell me when I was overthinking something. We weren't perfect, but I trusted them. Our childhood had been ordinary in the ways that matter. Sunday dinners, school concerts, summer road trips, arguments over bathroom time. My father's habit of leaving his coffee half-finished in 3 different rooms. My mother's handwritten notes on the refrigerator. I had never imagined there was a locked room in our family story that everyone knew existed except me. 2 days after finding the key, I drove to the storage facility. I told myself I was only going to look. I wouldn't open anything until I understood why my father had kept the unit. But when I stood in front of door 214, I could feel my hands shaking. I inserted the key. It turned. Inside were boxes stacked nearly to the ceiling, old furniture, a broken television, children's toys, 3 suitcases, and 1 small wooden crib. I stared at the crib for a long time because there was something deeply unsettling about seeing a baby's bed in a storage unit that had apparently been maintained in secret for 2 decades. I opened the nearest box. Inside were baby clothes, tiny socks, a blue blanket, a hospital bracelet. I picked up the bracelet and read the name printed on it. Ethan Miller. Underneath was a date, October 17th, 2004. I nearly dropped it. October 17th, 2004 was the day my family had always told me was the happiest day of my life because it was the day Daniel became a father for the first time. Except Daniel's daughter, Sophie, had been born in 2006. So who was Ethan? I searched through another box and found photographs. A newborn baby, a young woman holding him, my father standing beside them. My mother was nowhere in the pictures. Then I found a photograph that made the room feel suddenly too small. It showed my father holding the baby. On the back, in his handwriting, were 4 words. He should have come home. I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I called my mother. She answered immediately. "Where are you?" she asked. I said, "Unit 214. She hung up. 10 minutes later, she arrived. She looked at the open storage door, then at me, and I saw the same fear I'd seen when I was a child and accidentally broke something important. But this time she wasn't afraid I'd broken an object. She was afraid I'd broken the lie. "Who is Ethan?" I asked. My mother sat down on an old wooden chair. For nearly a minute she said nothing. Finally she whispered, "Your father's son." I felt as though the ground had shifted beneath me. "What? Ethan was your father's child? Before you?" She nodded. "No, during your marriage." I stared at her. "What are you saying?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm saying your father had another child." I thought of all the possibilities, all the explanations that could make that sentence less devastating. None did. "Where is he?" My mother looked at the floor. "He's dead." I didn't believe her. "How?" "He died when he was a baby." "When?" "October 19th, 2004. 2 days after his birth. I looked at the photographs again. Then why did Dad write, he should have come home? My mother didn't answer. I asked again. She still didn't answer. Then Daniel walked into the storage unit. He had followed her. He looked at the boxes, then at me. You weren't supposed to find this. I turned toward him. How long have you known? He rubbed his face. Since I was 17. I was furious. You were 17 and nobody told me? Dad made me promise. You were a teenager. I know. You knew there was a dead baby in our family and you never said anything? His voice broke. Because Dad begged me. That stopped me. I asked why. Daniel looked at our mother. She closed her eyes. Then he said, because Ethan wasn't supposed to exist. I felt sick. What does that mean? Daniel looked at me. It means the story Mom told you about Ethan isn't the whole story. My mother stood up. Daniel, no, Mom. She deserves to know. He turned toward me. Ethan wasn't Dad's son. Silence. I looked between them. You just said he was. He was, Daniel said, but not biologically. My mother's face collapsed. I asked, then whose baby was he? Neither answered. Daniel finally said, your mother's sister. I stared at him. Aunt Sarah? My mother nodded. Sarah was my mother's younger sister. I barely remembered her because she had died when I was very young. Our family had always said she died in a car accident when I was 3. There had been no photographs of her in our house, no stories, no visits, just a name that nobody liked discussing. Ethan was Sarah's son? I asked. My mother nodded again. And Dad was raising him? Trying to, she whispered. Why? I asked. My mother looked at the baby clothes. Because Sarah couldn't. Then the story became something I couldn't have imagined. Sarah had been 19 when she became pregnant. She was frightened, unstable, and involved with a man my family didn't trust. My grandparents wanted the pregnancy hidden because they were terrified of scandal. My father, who was Sarah's brother-in-law, offered to help. He and my mother had been married for several years, and they had Daniel. They had me. Their marriage looked stable from the outside, but according to my mother, there had been one thing nobody knew. Sarah had asked my father to take Ethan away after he was born, not temporarily, permanently. She wanted him raised by people who could give him a normal life. My father agreed. My mother agreed. And for 2 days they believed they had solved the impossible. Then Ethan became sick. His lungs were underdeveloped. The doctors said he needed specialized treatment. My father refused to give up. He spent the night beside the incubator. My mother told me he kept saying, he's coming home. But Ethan died before dawn, 2 days old, and the family decided the truth was too complicated to explain. They told everyone Sarah had lost the baby. They told me nothing because I was too young. But that still didn't explain why the storage unit existed for 20 years. So I asked the question that changed everything. Why did Dad keep all of this? My mother looked at me. Because he didn't believe Ethan was really gone. I thought she meant grief. She didn't. My father had spent the first several years after Ethan's death investigating what happened at the hospital. He had discovered inconsistencies in the records. The doctor listed on Ethan's discharge paperwork wasn't the doctor who had treated him. The death certificate had been filed late. There was a missing page from the hospital record, and most disturbing of all, my father had found a nurse who claimed Ethan had been alive when she left her shift. My father became convinced there had been a mistake. Maybe Ethan hadn't died. Maybe another baby had been placed in the wrong records. Maybe someone had taken him. He couldn't accept that the child he'd promised to protect had simply disappeared from his life. He started searching, quietly at first, then obsessively. He followed hospital records, adoption files, old addresses, anything he could find. My mother begged him to stop. He refused. Eventually Daniel discovered the truth when he found the storage receipts. My father made him promise never to tell me because he believed the investigation could destroy our family. But there was more. My father hadn't been searching for Ethan for 20 years without finding anything. He had found a name, a woman named Melissa Grant, a woman who had worked at the hospital in 2004. She had left the hospital shortly after Ethan's supposed death. My father had tracked her down in another state. And 3 years before his death he had visited her. She told him something that made him believe the impossible. The baby didn't die. I couldn't breathe. What? My mother whispered. We don't know if it's true. I demanded the rest. Daniel pulled a notebook from one of the boxes. It was my father's handwriting. Page after page contained dates, names, phone numbers, and notes. On one page, underlined twice, were the words, Ethan survived. Beneath them was an address. My hands shook as I read it. It was in our own city. I looked at my mother. Did Dad ever go there? She nodded. Yes. Who lives there? She didn't answer. Daniel did. A man named Michael Grant. My heart began pounding. How old? 21. I looked at the date of birth written in the notebook. October 17th, 2004. The same date. I stared at Daniel. You're telling me Dad found a 21-year-old man, born on the exact day Ethan was born? Daniel nodded, and he believed that was him. I couldn't understand why my father had never told us. Then I found the final entry in the notebook. It was dated 2 months before his death. I know who he is. I need proof before I tell them. Below it was a phone number. I called it. A man answered. Hello? I almost hung up. Is this Michael? Silence. Yes. My voice trembled. My name is Claire. My father was Robert Miller. The line went completely quiet. Then Michael said, I know. I closed my eyes. You knew my father? He came to see me. How many times? 4. Did he tell you who he thought you were? Another silence. Yes. My heart was racing. What did he say? Michael's voice became softer. He said he thought I was his nephew. Not his son, his nephew. Because Michael was supposedly Sarah's child. The same baby who had supposedly died. I asked if he knew about Ethan. I was told I was adopted, he said. My adoptive parents told me my birth records were sealed. Did you know your birth date? October 17th, 2004. I felt tears fill my eyes. I asked him to meet me. He agreed. The next afternoon, Michael walked into a small cafe wearing a gray jacket and carrying a folder. The first thing I noticed was his eyes. They were my father's eyes, the same deep brown eyes, the same habit of looking down before answering difficult questions. I didn't know whether genetics could make someone feel familiar, but sitting across from him felt like meeting a memory. We compared photographs. We compared medical information. We compared childhood records. He had the same unusual allergy my father had, the same small indentation in his chin, the same blood type, but none of it proved he was Ethan. Then Michael opened his folder. Inside was a copy of his original birth record. The mother's name was Sarah Bennett, my mother's maiden name. The father's name was blank. The hospital was the same hospital where Ethan had supposedly died, and the date was October 17th, 2004. I couldn't speak. Michael looked at me. Your father believed I was the baby. Why didn't he tell us? Because he didn't know for sure. Did he do a DNA test? Michael shook his head. He asked me to. I refused. I was shocked. Why? Because I was angry. At him? At everyone. Michael explained that my father had told him the story. He said Sarah had been his sister-in-law. He said the baby had died. He said he believed there had been a hospital error, but Michael didn't want to become someone's dead relative brought back to life just because the evidence was incomplete. He told my father he needed proof. My father promised to get it. Then he died. I asked Michael why he had kept the meeting secret. Because your father asked me not to contact your family until he knew the truth. And now? I asked. He looked at me. Now I don't know what the truth is. I went home and confronted my mother with everything. This time she didn't try to stop me. She sat at the kitchen table and listened while I told her about Michael. When I finished, she whispered, I knew. I froze. You knew? Your father told me. That Michael might be Ethan? She nodded. Then why didn't you tell me? She began crying. Because I was terrified. Of what? Of losing you. I couldn't understand. How would finding a missing cousin make you lose me? She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. Because if Michael is Ethan, then Sarah's child didn't die. And if Sarah's child didn't die, then the person who helped make him disappear has been living with us all these years. My blood went cold. What are you saying? My mother looked toward the hallway. Your grandfather knew. I stared at her. Knew what? He knew Ethan was alive. She told me my grandfather had been furious when Sarah became pregnant. He believed the child would destroy the family's reputation. When Ethan was born sick, he used his influence to arrange a private transfer to another hospital. The official death record was created because he wanted the family to believe the baby had died. But the baby survived. A nurse secretly contacted a social worker, and Ethan was placed with another family under a different name. My grandfather believed he had solved the problem. My father discovered the truth years later. He spent 20 years trying to find the child. But there was one thing my mother still hadn't told me. Why did you help him? I asked. She covered her face. Because I was afraid of my father. You knew? Not at first. She admitted she discovered the truth shortly after my grandfather died. By then, she had already spent years believing Ethan was dead. She didn't know what to do. She feared that exposing the secret would destroy Sarah's memory, destroy the family, and expose her own role in hiding the truth. So she stayed silent. She let my father search alone. She let Daniel carry the secret. And she let me grow up believing our family history was complete. I asked her one final question. Why did Dad keep searching if he knew you were afraid? She looked at me and whispered, because he believed someone had to tell the truth before he died. The next morning I met Michael again. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked me something I wasn't prepared for. Do you want to know if I'm your cousin? I looked at him. Yes? Even if the answer ruins what you remember about your family. I nodded. Yes. We went to a laboratory together. The DNA test took 7 days. Those 7 days were the longest of my life. My mother stopped sleeping. Daniel barely spoke to anyone. I kept thinking about my father. I wondered how many nights he had sat in his chair looking at the same photograph, knowing there was a missing child somewhere in the world. On the 7th day, Michael and I opened the results together. The probability of a biological relationship was greater than 99.99%. Michael was Ethan. He had been alive the entire time. The baby my family had mourned for 20 years had grown up 3 hours away. He had gone to school, fallen in love, worked, struggled, celebrated birthdays, and lived a completely separate life, while our family kept a box of his baby clothes locked in a storage unit. But the truth didn't bring relief. It detonated everything. My mother confronted the truth she'd spent 20 years avoiding. Daniel admitted he had known about Ethan since he was 17, and had resented our father for making him carry the secret. My Aunt Sarah's old records revealed that she had spent years believing her baby was dead. She had died before learning he was alive, and my grandfather, who had been remembered as a strict but respectable man, had deliberately erased a living child from his family because he was afraid of embarrassment. The most painful part was learning that my father had never been able to fix what had happened. He had found Ethan, but he hadn't known how to bring him home. He had been afraid that revealing the truth would destroy his marriage, hurt his children, and reopen wounds nobody was prepared to face. He died carrying the answer. We held the funeral for my father months earlier. Now, for the first time, I understood why he had looked so tired during his final year. He hadn't been hiding an affair. He hadn't been hiding another family. He had been carrying the knowledge that someone in our family had been erased, and that he had failed to bring him back. Michael came to our house one Sunday afternoon. My mother opened the door. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then she said, "I am sorry." Michael looked at her. "I know." She began to cry. He stepped forward and hugged her. I watched them and realized forgiveness doesn't always arrive as a dramatic speech. Sometimes it looks like two people standing in a doorway, carrying 20 years of anger, and choosing not to add another 20. Daniel eventually came outside. He and Michael talked for almost an hour. I didn't listen. They needed that conversation without me. Later that evening, we sat around the dining table. 5 chairs were occupied. My mother, Daniel, me, Michael, and one empty chair where my father used to sit. Nobody tried to pretend the past hadn't happened. We talked about Sarah. We talked about my grandfather. We talked about the years we had lost. Michael told us about his childhood with the family who raised him. He didn't call them villains. They had loved him. They hadn't known the entire truth either. And that was perhaps the hardest lesson of all. The secret hadn't belonged to one person. It had been passed from frightened adult to frightened adult until silence became part of the family itself. Before Michael left that night, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of my father holding him as a newborn. On the back, my father had written, "One day, he will know where he came from." I couldn't stop crying. My father had been wrong about one thing. Michael didn't need to know where he came from because of blood. He needed to know because someone had spent 20 years making him believe his first family had disappeared before he was old enough to remember them. The storage unit was emptied a few weeks later. We donated most of the furniture. The baby clothes went to a charity. I kept the blue blanket. Michael kept the hospital bracelet. My mother kept the photograph of Sarah. And the notebook my father had filled with 20 years of searching stayed with all of us, because it no longer belonged to one person. It belonged to the truth. I still think about that brass key sometimes. A tiny piece of metal that opened a door my family had spent 2 decades trying to keep closed. Finding it didn't give me the childhood I thought I had. It didn't erase the lies. It didn't bring Sarah back. It didn't give my father another chance to explain himself. But it gave us something silence never could. The ability to finally stop guessing. I used to believe families fell apart because people stopped loving each other. Now I think sometimes they fall apart because people love each other so desperately that they become afraid of the truth. They hide mistakes. They hide shame. They hide grief. They tell themselves they're protecting everyone. And years later, the secret becomes heavier than the thing they were trying to protect. My family lost 20 years to silence, but we didn't have to lose the rest of our lives to it. Michael is part of our family now. Not because a DNA test said so, but because we finally stopped letting a 20-year-old lie decide who belonged at the table. If you discovered that your family had hidden something this enormous from you for 20 years, would you want every detail of the truth no matter how painful it was? Or would there be some things you'd rather leave buried? Tell me what you would do. And if this story stayed with you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, because the next story may remind you that sometimes the person hiding the truth isn't trying to hurt you. They're simply too afraid to face what happens when the truth finally comes out.